This is Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is about a gentleman who was a World War II pilot and a speed racer and a distance record holder in aviation. His name was William Paul Odom Jr. William Odom was born October 21st, 1919, in Raymore, Missouri, to Dennis and Ethel Powers Odom. While in high school, he went to work at the local airfield. His maternal uncle, Vernon Powers, learned to fly under the famous Aviator Charles Lindbergh. Powers was an airmail pilot and also a flight instructor in St. Louis, Missouri. And he, of course, set William on his path in aviation. By age 18, Bill, as his friends knew him, worked radios for Trans World Airlines in Amarillo, Texas. During this time, he began to learn to fly, and he was accumulating flight hours. By 1940, he had joined the Canadian Royal Air Force, and his first assignment was ferrying jets to England, first as a navigator and then as a pilot. He flew as an executive pilot at the American Overseas Export Airlines for Ferry Gyroscope and for Chrysler Corporation. And then he flew DC-3s over the Hump from China to India, which is over the Himalayas, for the Chinese National Aviation Corporation. At some point, he then serves in the U.S. Army Air Corps as a captain flying heavies. After the war, he returned home and began entering flying competitions, specifically for distance. On April 1st, 1947, he flew a converted A-20 bomber, which is a Douglas A-26B Reynolds bomber, setting a round-the-world flight record, flying out of Chicago, Illinois, and returning to the same airfield in 3 days, 6 hours, 55 minutes, and 56 seconds. Unfortunately, it was not an official record because no FAI, aviation official, were present to witness the event or to lock the gauges to preserve the record. So, a few months later, in August of the same year, he took off once more to set the record. He returned in 73 hours, 5 minutes, and 11 seconds, with the FAI officials present this time to lock the gauges for the record. Aerospace engineer and business magnate Howard Hughes sent him a personal note of congratulations for his record flight. He then set out to break the light plane record for the longest flight in the 397 to 549 cubic inch engine displacement category. So he set out in January of 1949 from Honolulu Airfield in his plane, Waikiki Beach, flying to Oakland, California, over 2,300 miles. This broke the previous light plane record of 2,061 miles set by Russian pilots Gusarov and Glebov. The Waikiki Beach was a tiny plane. It was a post-World War II V-type tail. The gears tucked up in the wings on takeoff, increasing the aerodynamics of the frame, which lessened its burn rate of fuel. Its engine was 185 horsepower, 6-cylinder, carrying $75 worth of fuel. At that point, that was 260 gallons of gas. He had 100 gallons of that fuel in an extra tank in the cabin. Each wingtip carried 60 gallons of fuel, and the remainder was in the fuselage tank. This plane also carried the pilot, the emergency gear, radio maps, and flight instruments. Its takeoff weight was 3,750 pounds of low-flying monoplane. Over the Pacific, he lost radio contact and was 2 hours behind schedule. He had started with 260 gallons of fuel and only had 80 gallons left when he did finally fly over the Golden Gate Bridge at 4:27 p.m. He had hit a bit of a nasty headwind over the Pacific that had eaten up much of his fuel. As he approached San Francisco, he radioed he was going as far as possible and headed for Reno, Nevada, over the Sierras. However, icing forced him to turn back toward Sacramento, but no civil aeronautic officials were there, so he continued back toward San Francisco and Oakland to land. There he had the instrument sealed and the record recorded. At the time he landed, he had flown 2,406.87 miles. He ate fig Newtons and drank water and coffee on that flight. That was all he had. He flew in a business suit and tie and shaved with his electric razor before stepping out of the plane. His first words to the press were, "Boy, am I tired." His plane, Waikiki Beach, is now on display at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. He did marry, and Bill had 2 children with his wife, and they made their home in Ithaca, New York. His benefactor, who sponsored his around-the-world flights, was Milton Reynolds. Reynolds was a wealthy business marketing genius who had successfully marketed ballpoint pens to the American people. Reynolds believed that Odom had the same type of charm and personality that Lindbergh had. Thus, it would make him a national treasure and a great face for marketing to the American public. He personally bankrolled Odom's efforts, and he helped him set his sights on the next record he should break. This time, it would be speed races. Odom and Reynolds set their eyes on the next record to break would be on the national air races that had been on hiatus during World War II. The post-war races would feature newer fighter class of aircraft, something that he didn't have any experience in. But the next event would be set for the fall of 1949 in Cleveland, Ohio. It would be a 3-day event running from September 3rd to the 5th, and it was eagerly awaited as it was, quote, the 12th annual event. Pre-war races in this particular race had featured custom-built racers, but in this 1949 event, they were using modified military fighter aircraft. There were 2 divisions, the J division of traditional military jets and the R division of reciprocating aircraft. Odom entered the speed race on the first day and handily won in his plane, the Beguine. I think that's how you pronounce it. A radically modified North American Aviation P51 Mustang that was owned, and he was partnered with a fellow aviatrix, Jacqueline. Cochran held speed and altitude records, including the 1938 Transcontinental Bendix Trophy Race and a second place in 1946 in the Bendix with her plane Lucky Strike Green, a P51B Mustang. But Cochran bought the Beguine from J.D. Reed Company, Incorporated in Houston, Texas. After the Nationals, she and Odom would plan to enter this plane in the 1950 Bendix Trophy Race, this time with Cochran piloting. To prepare the Beguine for this style of racing, certain modifications were made, including removing fairing over the bottom portion of the fuselage, moving the radiator and engine oil cooler from the fuselage to the wingtips. The plane's full name, bestowed by Reed, the original owner, was Begin with Beguine, which is named after a Cole Porter song of the same name. The plane was then painted green with gold musical notes along the fuselage and the number 7. Odom, flying the plane, qualified for the Ohio races at the Thompson Trophy Race 3 days prior to the Nationals. He won that race in a $19,100 purse. His average speed was 388.393 miles per hour. He entered the qualifying heats for the Thompson Trophy Race on September 3rd of the Nationals, where at the Nationals, over 170,000 people had purchased tickets to attend the 3-day event. On the first day, in front of record crowds, he clocked a 405.565 mile per hour time. On Monday, September 5th, Odom lined up for the Thompson Trophy Race, confident in his recent record, and this race consisted of 15 laps. Each lap had 7 turns around a course marked by a tall pylon at the airport and balloons at each turn. From the start of the race, Odom took the lead. In the second lap, he ended up inside the number 3 balloon, and as he approached pylon number 4, and he's trying to move to the outside, he lost control of his plane when he overcorrected his flight pattern to move outside those balloons. The plane inverted in a roll and entered in a nosedive and crashed into a home. The father and his 5-year-old and toddler were in the yard of this home watching the air races. The mom was in the house when the plane augured into the home the family had just purchased 4 days prior. The home exploded, killing the mom, the pilot Odom, and burning the toddler who was in the playpen in the driveway with father. Dad was severely burned trying to rescue the toddler and then the mother. The toddler died several hours later from his burns. Odom himself was so badly burned that he was only identified by his wristwatch. The mother and her little one were buried together. Odom's remains were sent to Columbus, Mississippi. The race continued despite the crash. Cook Cleland, a decorated World War II fighter pilot, handily won the race in an FTG Corsair. After the race, Cleland and others said Odom had no business flying the Burgoyne in that race. Odom was a cross-country distance pilot and a darn good one. However, he was not a speed race pilot, and the Burgoyne was, quote, too much plane for him. Cleland continued, the plane was good. He was just the wrong guy to fly it. William Paul Odom is buried in Friendship Cemetery in Columbus, Mississippi. Though he never lived here, his parents had moved to Columbus less than a year prior to his death. They had his body brought to Columbus, and the service was held at First Baptist Church. In attendance were over 400 people, including his children and his ex-wife. Milton Reynolds, the sponsor of the bombshell global flights from Chicago, the former owners of the Burgoyne, Mr. and Mrs. J.D. Reed from Texas, and Walter Beach, the manufacturer of Beechcraft planes, and his exec, Phelps McKnight. William Paul Odom was buried with full military honors, including a flyby of 10 fighters, a C-47, a 21-gun salute, and taps. He is buried in Plot 695 in Friendship Cemetery in Columbus. Thank you for coming on this episode of my podcast. Until next time, this is Shannon Evans and the Tom Bigby Tales.